Kyle, we've relied on your reporting as these batches of transcripts and sort of the raw evidence has been released in a frantic push by the committee. Take us through what, for you, are the highlights.
Sure. I mean, this whole batch of evidence, I would argue, is probably the most significant thing they've released so far. It's, as you said, it's the raw underlying material that they use to craft their report. And, you know, we've been reading transcripts for days now, but all of that is people's foggy memories of things that happened almost 2 years ago or more. This is the contemporaneous evidence, what people were thinking at the time, the conversations they were having with Trump, about Trump, around Trump, you know, on the way to January 6th. And so you have things like Dan Scavino, his social media aide, telling someone a couple of weeks after January 6th, by the way, he writes all of his own tweets. And that was in the context of discussing the Be There, Will Be Wild tweet on December 19th that led to so many people coming to Washington, D.C. for that day, for January 6th. So it's these insights, little insights at the committee. Some of it was in their public hearings, but a lot of it was not.
You know, Kyle, something that was notable, at least half of the members of the committee who appeared on this show very confidently asserted that someone at the Secret Service was lying. It's clear that someone very well may have been Tony Ornato, and his do not recall was not a credible answer in some of their questions in their deposition. Is that a fair read?
Yeah, and I mean, they'll say as much. I mean, they said, I think even in the report, they say, we don't believe that Tony Ornato doesn't remember some of the stuff he claimed to not remember. How do you forget some of this stuff? You know, so they sort of shrugged and said, you know, we don't know for sure, but we don't really trust his lack of memory on some of these key issues. And as you pointed out, the contemporaneous texts show that he was engaged in these conversations, and that's why there's so much more value in seeing what people were saying in real time as opposed to this, you know, years later.
Katie Benner, of course, all the questions as this evidence has poured out is how much of it and when will DOJ dig their fingers into it? Do you have any indication that Cassidy Hutchinson is a critical witness in any of DOJ's criminal investigations related to 1-6?
Sure, I'll take your question in its parts. You know, first of all, the Justice Department does have all of the transcripts and information now at its disposal and is going through it. Cassidy Hutchinson would be a very good witness, and I'm sure that she is somebody that the Justice Department would want to speak with. But I think that what we see, especially from the transcripts and text messages and the White House phone logs, that's very intriguing. You kind of see the problem that emerges for the Justice Department. And the issue is not whether or not they can speak to somebody like Cassidy Hutchinson. It's whether or not any of the people at the heart of the conversations going on around Trump will speak to the Justice Department. So when you look at the call logs, a great, very searing example is Trump speaking with Brad Raffensperger in Georgia, trying to get him to undo the results of that election there, to find him the votes that would make that possible. And then he goes and he speaks with Rudy Giuliani, Steve Bannon, and Mark Meadows. That is a black box. And it would be really important for the Justice Department to know what happened there with great certitude if they want to move forward with any kind of prosecution. And so even though Cassidy Hutchinson is a great witness in terms of bringing to light what was happening in the White House, the sorts of conversations that were happening around Trump. When you're talking about a conspiracy that involves Donald Trump, possibly, you know, and others, you really need to understand what was happening in those conversations. And we see from the transcripts, the committee was never able to get some of those folks to be forthcoming. They also forget things. You know, Rudy Giuliani conveniently forgets everything. They plead the fifth, or in the case of Meadows, they don't cooperate at all. So it's going to be, you know, it's to be seen whether or not the Justice Department gets more forthcoming answers from those people. And if it doesn't, I don't know that even a witness like Cassidy Hutchinson would be able to get a jury beyond the idea of reasonable doubt what was going on in the room and in these conversations.
So, Barbara, I guess this is where the questions move toward what will DOJ do to penetrate that black box that Katie Benner's describing?
Well, first, I don't know that it's necessary to penetrate every black box. There are times when there are communications between co-defendants that you can never penetrate. But the choice that you often present to people in that situation is, would you rather be a defendant or would you rather be a witness? And so people like Mark Meadows maybe decides that they want to have a political future. I don't know that you're ever going to even want Steve Bannon to cooperate. And Rudy Giuliani strikes me as someone whose credibility might be questionable. But you can build a case even without getting to that inner circle. Sometimes the circle just outside that circle can be just as valuable. People like Kenneth Chesebro, or Kenneth Klukowski. Those are the people who are working at the next level, especially when you have things like text messages and email messages. Those things can be used to corroborate the testimony of the people at that next level. And, as Kyle was saying, these text messages are like truth serum. People may not, they tell you they don't remember things, they may deny things, but things they said in the moment, those contemporaneous communications, usually do not lie and share great candor. The other thing I think the Justice Department is likely to do is to pore over all of these transcripts for nuggets of information that they can use to build a case against witnesses who are just sharing facts. Like, for example, one new one that came out today is Ronna Romney McDaniel, who testified about her conversations not only with John Eastman, but with Donald Trump about soliciting fake electors. There was not just one call that John Eastman led. There was a second call where she was back to Donald Trump to get an update on what was happening. She talked to his campaign lawyer, Justin Clark, about the progress. And so testimony like that, which is basically innocuous on its face, can be very valuable to the Justice Department in putting together all of the pieces here.
Yeah, and I meant to ask all of you what pieces of the testimony stood out. Katie, I missed that with you. What for you added to your understanding of something you've covered before or didn't know? What sort of piece of evidence or full transcript added context to something for you that you think is notable?
I think when we were reporting the story at the time, it was really interesting that the folks closest to Donald Trump, and even in the outer circle, people who are working in the White House like Kayleigh McEnany, they were really adamant that all was going well, that things were pretty normal up until January 6th. And then even then, you don't see a lot of public statements coming from folks in the White House, but you see privately that they really understood the gravity of the situation, that they had great regret about having let this situation go this far, that there were questions about what would happen to them next. And interestingly, I found it really surprising that so many of the biggest concerns were about things like their own job prospects, and what would happen to them, what would happen to their reputations, more so than about, for example, whether or not the attack was, a huge blow to democracy. So it was really interesting to sort of see the psychology of some of the players that we've been reporting on, especially since there was sort of, somewhat of a wall in that moment about what was happening in the White House.